was brought in to lose money. And you know how a railroad runs when it loses money? It has to dip into the taxpayers' fund to keep going. In other words, corporations got cheap rail rates because the government ran it at a loss, covering the loss with taxpayer money. So the burden of the railroad was pushed onto the taxpayer and off of the corporation. But I won't embarrass anyone in this room by asking how many leftists you know who think that when the government takes over, this is a step in the right direction. Oh no, it isn't. The capitalists have been doing this from day one, if, when, and as they wanted. If the left endorses that on the grounds that it's socialism, you're being duped twice. Don't do it. But of course, to understand that, it would help to have a general way of understanding how corporations work. These issues, these distributions of the surplus, shape our society. Whole populations in America and in other capitalist countries become leeches off the surplus. Once they get into their position, they realize this is an endless source of income. Lawyers, we made jokes earlier, lawyers develop an endless array of legalisms in order to suck out of corporations the maximum amount of surplus. They invent new ways of suing you. They invent new language about how you're vulnerable, and therefore why you need a larger lawyer, a legal staff to help protect you. At a certain point, the capitalists who understand this struggle, like Marxists do, our practical needs, you know what the capitalists do? They get together and they say, let's kill these people. I don't know how many of you are aware, but the struggle between the Republican and Democratic Party in the last 25 years has been crucially shaped by a fight over lawyers. And basically, the Trial Lawyers Association in the United States, the people who do the work in the courtroom, have been supporting the Democrats because the Democrats are more favorable to them, and the Republicans are lining up behind the capitalists who want to put a kibosh on the lawyers. If you paid any attention, you may have noticed the new law that was finally passed with Bush. He got it through. Put a $250,000 cap on all suits, liability suits. So if you eat something and it sticks in your throat and your left ear falls off and so forth, you can sue, but you can't get more than $250,000, no matter what the issue is. That's it. You have a cap. Well, who's that for? Is that for you? No. And all the publicity. We want the lawyers that is taking it. It's not good. We have a litigious society. Stop. Always ask. In a struggle in a capitalist society, if a struggle begins to get going, it's most of the time because some group of capitalists has decided to nail another group. Rarely is it a situation of the mass of people rising. I wish that weren't true, but it is the truth. And it makes no sense for us to hide it. I'm going to finish with an example from American history. In the period from 1945 to 1970, American capitalism was also shaky. It was shaky because it came out of a Great Depression and it was afraid it would fall back in. It was shaky because it had an enemy, the Soviet Union, and a serious one. And so the capitalists of the United States were basically willing to give a huge part of the surplus in taxes to the government. They really were. They wanted the government to hold back the Red Menace, put a ring of bases around the Soviet Union and all the socialist countries, develop nuclear weapons. You know the story. They wanted that. They were scared. And they wanted to smash unions, and they did all the things that they did. And they wanted the government to take the lead in all of that, so they paid. By the 1970s, American capitalists had a changed situation. Number one, they didn't feel threatened anymore by the Soviet Union. It was beginning to have such problems inside the Soviet Union, as we now know looking back, that it was less and less of a problem. It became a more problem in rhetoric, but not in reality. They felt very secure. The Depression was a fading memory. American workers were loyal and patriotic. They didn't feel they needed a big, powerful government the way they had in the past, number one. Number two, American companies were facing more serious competition. From 45 to 75, the rest of the world after World War II had to rebuild. The United States was top dog. We had no competitor. Nobody could compete with us. That's why from 45 to 75, if you drove a car anywhere in the world, it was probably an American car. For there to be anything other than a Chevy and a Ford, it took these companies 20, 30, 40 years to emerge as a Toyota or a VW or anything else. So we were the top. But by 1970s, we weren't anymore. There was the Toyota and there was the VW, and the competition was severe. And American corporations said, we don't need the government to play this big role anymore, Reagan, and we can't afford these stinking taxes, Reagan. So what the capitalists did is they ganged up on the government. They said, the government is the problem, the government is full of fat, the government is not doing anything, it's stealing our taxes, it's doing it, we all live in that. We've been living in it for 30 years. A real switch in which capitalists who didn't have enough surplus to take care of things wanted to save a ton of money on taxes. They got rid of the Democrats, who from Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy had been the major power in our government from 45 to 75. And they brought in the Tweedledum instead of the Tweedledee, the Republicans. Why? Because the Republicans were faithful servants of the get rid of this, stick it to the government, free us up. And they did. That's what Reagan and everybody since has done. Cut the taxes. It's an attack on the government, exactly like the attack on banks I told you about before. And the beauty of it is, the ideological way to save a ton of money on the government, which then, what did American corporations do with all the money they saved off of taxes? Tremendous cuts in taxes. Corporate taxes, number one. In 1945, corporations provided almost a third of the total tax take of the United States government, federal government. Today they provide about 8%. Shifted it all onto people, off the corporations. And the money they saved in not having to pay taxes, they used for capital accumulation. It's called the computer age. Financed because they could shift the surplus from the government in paying taxes to capital accumulation. And also to mergers, buying up every company. If you couldn't beat it competitively, buy it. That's what they did. Tremendous wave of consolidation. So they attacked the government. The beauty, they used American nativist ideology to make it all look good. It's for the individual. The government shouldn't be taking over our lives and telling us what to do. And the left, looking around without an idea. All that the left did, I'm exaggerating, but you see the point, is to line up with the poor, defunct Democratic Party, which didn't know what to do, because their whole rationale was, we're going to be the government, we're very smart, we come from Harvard, and we'll manage all of these things, and we'll get us out of the Depression, and we'll make a nice society, capitalism with a human face. The capitalists had it with the human face. We're very happy with an inhuman face. We don't care. Which Americans still don't want to face. Look at the debate in Washington about health care. Every day, more is given up. Nothing. You're going to get squat. We pay more for medical care than any country on earth that's developed, and our health care is poor. We rank about 20th out of the top 30 countries. So we get lousy quality, and we pay too much for it. And that's being preserved. That's a kind of index that there's no understanding from a Marxian perspective that would be able to identify what Reagan is the struggle of one group of capitalists against others. Those capitalists that depend on the Democratic Party social welfare spending get screwed. And those capitalists who want more than anything to save on their taxes, they win. That's how the game, and then all the capitalists adjust to this arrangement. And the irony is, they did so well They managed this attack on the government so well. The combination between that and lowered wages, that we had a profit boom, the likes of which we had not had before in American history. The last 25 years were ecstatic. But when that happened, this, part of what we're going to do next Monday, I'll show you how in the last 20 years, how this got rearranged, then produces the euphoria that becomes a bubble and then now plunges us into this. And what is happening now is all capitalists are scurrying, trying to figure out how to reallocate their surpluses to get through this bad period. Fundamental point. In Marxian theory, to understand capitalism involves whatever else you do, whatever other angles or aspects you study, is an examination of how the surplus is produced, by whom, appropriated, by whom, distributed by them, in what ways, and then to see how that shapes the history of the society. The distribution of surplus was not the only thing that explains what happened in the last 30 years. But I would argue you'll come up with a very different grasp of American history, now or any time, if you include this way of thinking. That's the contribution of Marxism. It allows you to ask and answer those questions, and the result is a different sense of what happened. We'll pick up next week and try to put together both the production and distribution of the surplus to get a general overview, and I will use it to deal with the crisis that we're in now, to show you how this theory elaborates that. And for that as well, the film that I handed out, if you didn't get a little flyer, that would also help you, because I'll do some of the things that are in this film, and between the film and my doing it live here, I think you'll get the idea. Thank you very much. I hope to see you next